This program is made possible by generous support from China City, with locations in Oak Harbor, Freeland, and Mill Creek, Washington, as well as these local businesses.
So I think few people can say that their undergraduate degree in philosophy landed them their first job practicing medicine. When I graduated from my nurse practitioner program in 2009 and moved back to Whitby to stay with my parents in my childhood home in Clinton, healthcare job postings were sparse. I'd imagined I'd work in Seattle, have a cute apartment in a trendy neighborhood. Instead, after discovering the shortage of open positions, I expanded my search from Anacortes to Olympia. I'd consider anything but Whidbey Island. As a single 20-something child of the island, working in my hometown elicited extreme anxiety. I'd be hanging out with my parents and their friends. I love you all, but... And worst of all, I'd never find a partner. So when Group Health in Olympia called me for an interview, I happily agreed. It was raining the day of the interview, and despite leaving what seemed like an ample 4 hours for the 100-mile drive to Olympia, I arrived 10 minutes late. Edgy and anxious, I sat down with the medical director for my first interview. It was quickly apparent Dr. Noel had not read my resume until that moment, which seemed like a bad sign. She began reading through. She put a circle around my degree in philosophy. She looked up. "You were a philosophy major?" So was I. That's huge. She then drew 2 stars next to the circle. I don't even recall her reading the rest of the resume, but I do recall her dropping me off at my next interview. "This is Brook Ott. You're going to love her." In my first years of practice, I pondered why this characteristically rational doctor would give so much weight to a degree in philosophy. Shouldn't I have been quizzed on my medical knowledge, like the usual dose range for lisinopril or the differential diagnosis for someone presenting with shortness of breath? But over time, I've come to see how my background in philosophy helps me each day, both with my patients and on a more personal level. I think I always knew this when I switched from a biology major, where I was studying some of the smallest microscopic parts of physical life, to a degree in philosophy, the study of ideas about knowledge, truth, and the nature and meaning of life. My interest in philosophy led me to a semester of study in Nepal at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, which had relocated to a small town called Bodha, just outside of Kathmandu. Bodha is famous for its beautiful white stupa. I lived there with a Tibetan host family in a 3-room apartment. The only modern appliance was a 2-burner electric stove which sat on the concrete counter. There was 1 sink with cold running water. Every weekday, I walked 2 dusty blocks to the monastery. I joined both Western and Nepali students, sitting cross-legged on the floor, for classes on the philosophy, history, and language of Tibet. I learned and practiced mindfulness and meditation. And most importantly, I learned the basic Buddhist teachings on dukkha, or suffering, and compassion. And though I'm not a practicing Buddhist, these teachings have had lasting impacts on my practice of medicine. At work, I have a habit of walking into a room and greeting my patients with, "How are you?" The question pops out of my mouth a few times per day, even though sometimes I can feel it sounds insensitive. So at some level, I should already know the answer. If they were in good health, they wouldn't usually be in my exam room. But old cultural habits of greeting are hard to break. Working in family practice, I am reminded daily of the constantly changing human body. People come to clinic when they are suffering, when they are in mental or physical pain, when they're concerned about a particular constellation of symptoms. They come when they feel they have lost control, when their typically resilient and dependable body has confounded them. So it's easy for me to agree with the basic Buddhist teaching that life is suffering. On first look, this can seem pessimistic. I remember talking with a friend after our first lecture on dukkha at the monastery. He was upset, coming from a Christian understanding of life as love, he was upset that this seemingly pessimistic view could be a religious tenet. But what we learned during that semester is that Buddhism tries to teach how to relieve the suffering inherent in our human life. which is, of course, to a great extent, what my work is about as well. In medicine, though, I have many tools to help. I can order a test, prescribe a medication, diet change, or recommend a particular therapy or treatment, and people can feel better, and it's incredibly rewarding. But my most challenging visits are when these treatments don't help. The patient returns again for the same or similar concerns. It can feel like a failure, useless. My patient's desperation and dependence can feel overwhelming. I've sometimes already exhausted the tools of my usual Western medicine practice, where the patient may not have followed my previous recommendations. This is when I think philosophy helps me the most. So it encourages me to look at the big picture, to take a step back, to think about the nature, meaning of life, to let go of my own ego and feelings of failure. The Buddhist definition of compassion is an active effort to empathize with the experience of another. This doesn't mean I feel sorry for them, but that I try to listen attentively, place myself in their shoes. And when I can do this, I can sometimes feel my way towards helping them. I can help them identify their fear, find the right words of encouragement. I can help them move towards letting go of what is not in their control, or regaining control in the areas of life where they can be empowered in their own care. Of course, it doesn't always work. But when it does, it leaves me in awe at the uniquely human ability to change patterns. We have so many opportunities each day to make choices that have a positive influence on our lives and the lives of our families and communities. And now, I think that this value was an underlying value for my parents and the old hippie generation when they moved to Whitby in the 70s and 80s to escape the cities. I realize now that these values became ingrained in me at a young age. My own journey back to practice medicine in the community that I previously rejected sometimes surprises me. After taking the job in Olympia, I continued to harbor some loose dreams of ending up back in Seattle. But fortunately, I was still there 3 years later and met Chris. We'd come up to Whitby every few months for a weekend, and Chris would say I became Island Brooke as soon as we hit the dock in Clinton, more relaxed and carefree. We'd drag our heels leaving and end up waking up at 4:30 a.m. on Monday to catch the early boat back so we could stay just one more night. I think the feeling of getting away from the closeness of suburban life had something to do with it. We love the quiet and the country roads, the open areas, the water views, the forests. But more so, I think it's that this community values personal growth and community connection more than any place I've ever known. You can feel it, like tonight or this afternoon. So when we had the opportunity to move back in 2014, we took it. And in August of last year, we got married on my parents' property in Clinton. But pleasantly, I've discovered that the values of this community make my work easier and more rewarding. And some days, it feels like I'm able to support this community from the inside now by supporting the health of the community members. Thank you.